I lay in that hospital bed, too weak to lift my hand, as their voices drifted through the curtain like poison. Leave that woman here to die, my daughter-in-law said, cold, final. My own son didn't say a word, not even goodbye. After years of birthday cakes, bailouts, and bedside vigils, I wasn't his mother anymore. I was that woman, forgotten, disposable. But what they didn't know was I wasn't dead. Not yet. And everything they thought they'd inherit. I still held the pen. Before we begin, may I ask, where in this big, beautiful world are you listening from? It's always a quiet honor to know who's sharing this space. Drop it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. The beeping of the heart monitor was the only thing anchoring Carolyn to the living. It echoed in the sterile quiet of the hospital room like a metronome counting down a final act. Her ribs rose and fell, shallow and labored. Oxygen hissed softly through the nasal cannula, doing just enough to keep her suspended between this world and the next. The fluorescent lights above cast a pallid glow across her face, skin pale and drawn, bruised in places where the IVs had been reinserted again and again. Her hands trembled slightly on the stiff white sheets, fingers curled in as if bracing for something she couldn't name. From behind the thin privacy curtain, voices rose. She'll be dead by morning, Eric said, cold, final, like someone discussing the weather. Carolyn didn't move, but her eyes fluttered open slightly, just enough to let the words in. Janelle's voice followed. Leave that woman here to die. We've done enough. No emotion, no hesitation. Just the rustle of her purse strap sliding off her shoulder and the tap of heels on linoleum. A decision wrapped in disdain. Carolyn didn't cry. She didn't scream. Her body was too weak, her mind too exhausted. But somewhere beneath the static of her thoughts, something deep and raw twisted, like a rope pulled taut. They thought she was already gone, already finished. What they didn't know was that death had rules, and Carolyn wasn't done yet. Their footsteps trailed off toward the hallway, but there was one more sound, softer, slower. Not heels, not boots. Flat-soled, careful, the curtain whispered aside. A nurse stood there, a woman in navy blue scrubs, her badge clipped crookedly to her collar. Mid-40s maybe. Tired eyes, but sharp ones. I'm sorry you had to hear that, she said gently, checking Carolyn's IV line without looking directly at her. But that wasn't kindness, ma'am. What they did just now, that wasn't mercy. That was abandonment. Carolyn's breath rattled in her throat, too frail to respond, but her eyes, those eyes, focused for the first time in hours. The nurse noticed. Don't try to talk, just listen, she said, adjusting the oxygen flow slightly. You've got people like that, family who leave you to die alone. Then you've got two options, go quietly or not. Carolyn stared, silent, still. Then slowly, so slowly, she closed her eyes. To the nurse, it might have looked like surrender, but inside, Carolyn's mind moved like a slow-burning fuse. She didn't think of pain, she didn't think of fear. She replayed the words like evidence in a courtroom. Cold voices, final tones. That ugly word, enough. They had said it like she was trash left on the curb. Her heart rate steadied, not out of peace, but purpose. There was something about cruelty when spoken aloud. It didn't vanish. It imprinted, became something she could hold. The nurse moved to leave, but hesitated. You've got more life in you than they realize, she said quietly. I can feel it. She pulled the curtain back into place and disappeared down the hall. The room returned to silence, and then Carolyn opened her eyes again, not wide, not panicked, just open, focused. In her mind, she began to list facts. Not memories, facts, names, events, bank accounts, passwords, faces, conversations she wasn't supposed to hear. Things Eric and Janelle thought were buried. She'd kept them locked away for years, not out of weakness, but because she believed love meant protection. But love had left the room tonight. She didn't need to get out of that bed today. She just needed time. And revenge, like healing, required time. The monitor beeped on. The front door creaked open like a question no one wanted to ask. Carolyn stepped inside her own home with the quiet, unsure movement of someone entering a stranger's place. The air was stale, not dusty, just wrong. Too orderly, too quiet. Like someone had rearranged things for their own comfort, not hers. The mail was stacked on the console table by the door, rubber-banded into neat little piles, all unopened. Her name was still on everything, bills, statements, even birthday cards with foil lettering and pastel envelopes. But the postmark dates told the story. 2 months of silence, 2 months of being erased one envelope at a time. Her hand shook as she picked one up. The ink had bled slightly from moisture, maybe rain, maybe a dropped tear. In the kitchen, a yellow sticky note was slapped dead center on the refrigerator. Don't forget, POA meeting Friday, Resfa 9 a.m. Eric, POA, power of attorney. Her jaw locked. She pulled the note off with 2 fingers and held it like it might burn through her skin. They weren't just planning for her death. They were scheduling it, the kind of meeting people have after a funeral. Except Carolyn was still breathing. The sound of tires crunching gravel snapped her out of it. A knock followed, sharp, quick. Then the door opened with a voice behind it. Carolyn, I brought that chicken noodle you like. Tina stepped in, wearing jeans and a long cardigan that looked like it had seen 100 laundry cycles. Her shoulder-length curls were windblown, and the plastic container in her hands was steaming through the lid. Jesus, she muttered when she saw Carolyn. You look like you wrestled a ghost. I did, Carolyn rasped, voice still rough from the oxygen. I won. Tina set the soup on the counter, then reached out and touched Carolyn's wrist. Not like a doctor, like a friend making sure the person was real. You shouldn't be up. I shouldn't be dead either. Yet here we are? Carolyn lowered herself into the nearest chair. She hadn't planned to tell Tina everything, but it came out anyway, maybe because it had to. The words spilled in slow, jagged pieces. The hospital, the curtain, Eric's voice, Janelle's heels, the nurse, and that sticky note. By the time she finished, Tina had gone stone still. Well, Tina said, opening the cabinet and pulling down 2 mismatched mugs. We have 2 things now, time and receipts. Carolyn let out a breath that almost became a laugh, except it hurt too much in her ribs. Tina poured tea from an old kettle she'd found under the sink. You want honey? I want them buried. Tina raised her mug. That too. Carolyn stood, slower this time, and moved toward the hallway. She paused by the bookshelf, one of the few things untouched. Her fingers found the hardcover ledger wedged between a family Bible and a photo album. She brought it back, setting it on the table with quiet ceremony. Inside was the will. The one from 7 years ago. Carolyn flipped to the second page and pointed. Eric's name, then Janelle's. Both listed in ink as sole beneficiaries. Tina leaned over, frowning. This the most recent version? No, it's the last one I let them see. Carolyn's voice was flat. I updated it last year. They don't know yet. Guess they thought I wouldn't outlive their lies. Tina pushed the soup aside. You need a lawyer, a real one, not whatever snake Eric's got on retainer. I've got one. Harold Evans, downtown, still on retainer. Well then, Tina said, tapping the table with one finger like a chess move had just clicked into place. How about we erase them first? Carolyn looked down at her hands. The bruises had faded, but the imprints remained. I don't want justice, she whispered. I know. I want memory. I want Eric to remember the moment everything slipped. I want Janelle to wonder, every day, when it's coming. Tina nodded once. So let's start with what they took. Carolyn opened the drawer to her right and pulled out a small fireproof lockbox. Inside, account statements, voice memos, a flash drive labeled in Sharpie, EJ, recordings. The smell of chicken soup filled the room, but the warmth wasn't from the food anymore. The waiting room on the 12th floor smelled like leather polish and rain. Floor-to-ceiling windows looked out over the skyline, gray clouds bruising the sky, traffic pulsing below like veins in a city's throat. Carolyn sat in a wingback chair, her posture upright despite the ache that still whispered through her body. She wore a scarf, deep burgundy, draped loosely over her shoulders, not to hide, but to mark the difference between who she was and who she'd been. The frosted glass door clicked open. "Ms. Elridge," a receptionist said, smiling. "David's ready for you." Carolyn stood without help. Inside, Harold Evans' old office had been redecorated. Sleek now, minimalist. Walls lined with legal books and framed precedent rulings. But the heart of it hadn't changed, because the man behind the desk hadn't. David Worthington, late 30s, clean-shaven, eyes sharp as a lit match, rose as she entered, his hand already extended. "Well," he said warmly, "look who proved every hospital note wrong." Carolyn smiled, slow and razor-thin. "Let's rewrite everything." David's grin widened. "I hoped you'd say that." They sat across from each other, no handshakes, just mutual understanding. David opened his laptop, fingers poised over the keys. "Same structure?" he asked. "No. Burn it down." "Good." Carolyn reached into her bag and handed over the old will, folded neatly, creased at the edges like a confession. David flipped through it briefly, face unreadable. "You sure about full removal?" he asked. "Yes. No contingencies. None for them." He began typing efficiently, lines appearing on the screen like a verdict being formed in real time. "Eric and Janelle Elridge," he murmured, "hereby removed as named beneficiaries." Carolyn exhaled, a breath that felt like it had waited inside her ribs for years. "I want the estate divided into 3 trusts," she said. Educational funds for first-gen students, housing stipends for single mothers, medical debt forgiveness programs, especially for women over 50. David blinked, impressed. "That's bold." "It's what the money was supposed to be for," she said, before Eric decided vacation homes were a better legacy. "Any clauses?" "Yes. Contestation clause. If either of them files to challenge the will, they forfeit all rights to contact you in perpetuity," David finished, already typing. "We'll add a no harassment stipulation. If they show up, send letters, even breathe the wrong direction, it's contempt." Carolyn nodded. "Perfect." There was a long pause as David reviewed the documents silently, eyes scanning line by line. Then he looked up at her. "This isn't revenge," he said. "It's redistribution." Carolyn's face didn't move. "It's both," she said. David chuckled softly. "You always were better at closing arguments than Harold ever gave you credit for." She smiled, but her eyes stayed cold. "He thought loyalty meant silence. Turns out, it just meant I knew when to listen." He tapped the keyboard once, saving the draft. "We'll notarize today. I'll file it before end of week. You want me to mail them a copy?" "No," she said. "I want them to find out the same way I did. Quietly, unexpectedly." "And too late to stop it." David leaned back. "You know, when most people do this, there's some hint of regret, or at least fear of consequence." Carolyn looked out the window. The city lights were beginning to pierce the clouds, glowing gold through the gray. "They tried to write my ending without my permission," she said. "All I'm doing now is picking up the pen." The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was reverent. Then David cleared his throat, slipping a printed draft into a folder. "You'll need to sign twice, once for the redistribution clause, once for the forfeiture stipulation." She took the pen, steady hand, no hesitation. Outside the office, thunder rolled in the distance, low, long, inevitable. She signed the line once, then again. David gathered the papers, tucking them into a locked drawer behind him. "It's done." But Carolyn didn't stand. She reached into her bag again and placed the flash drive on the table, the one labeled EJ, Recordings. David raised an eyebrow. "What's that?" "Insurance." He hesitated. You want to include it in the trust language? Carolyn looked at the door, then back at him. No, she said. I want you to hear it. Alone. Tonight. David's smile faded. She stood, adjusting her scarf. Then you'll understand why erasing them wasn't just legal. It was necessary. She walked out without another word. The knock came just after 10. Too polite to ignore, too early to trust. Carolyn paused halfway down the stairs, her robe cinched tight, hair pulled back into something functional. The scarf was gone today, no more signs of softness. Through the frosted glass of the door, she saw the outline of two figures, tall and angular. She didn't flinch. She opened the door slowly. Eric smiled, plastic and wide. Janelle stood just behind him, holding a reusable grocery bag like it was a peace offering. Hey, Mom, Eric said, voice warm enough to steam up a mirror. Thought we'd stop by. Brought some things. Janelle stepped forward with that brittle, breathy charm she wore, like perfume. We didn't want you overdoing it, so we grabbed a few groceries. Easy stuff, soup, bananas, tea. Carolyn took the bag without a word and stepped aside. They entered like they'd never left her for dead. Eric looked around, then commented casually. Place still looks the same. Carolyn offered nothing. She walked to the kitchen, placed the bag on the counter, and began unloading the contents like she was handling evidence. From behind, Janelle's voice piped up. You know, maybe it's time you start thinking about next steps. You've got a long recovery ahead. That's a lot to manage alone. Eric followed up, sitting at the kitchen island like it was his office. We could help streamline things. We've got ideas. If we plan ahead, we can make everything easier. Carolyn turned to face them. Coffee? Janelle blinked. Oh, sure. Eric? Black? She moved slowly, deliberately. The drip machine took its time. No K-cups here. The quiet between them stretched. Eric cleared his throat. Obviously, we don't want to make things complicated. The last thing you need right now is stress. Carolyn opened the cabinet and took down 3 mugs. So we figured, he went on. We'd start helping out more, get things in writing, clean and easy. He tapped the counter as if signing invisible documents. I mean, if anything happened tomorrow, Janelle added. God forbid, but you don't want a mess left behind. Carolyn poured the coffee in silence. Her hands were steady. When she turned, her face was unreadable. She set the mugs in front of them. Steam curled upward like smoke from a slow burn. Janelle sipped and winced slightly. Still strong, huh? Eric didn't touch his. We talked to Harold's old assistant last week. What was his name? David? Carolyn raised an eyebrow. Eric gave a casual smile. Yeah, nice guy. Said he'd loop us in once everything's formalized. Just in case anything needed signatures. Carolyn stirred sugar into her own mug. David's thorough. That's good to hear, Janelle said brightly. You've always been generous. We just want to make sure your intentions are honored. Fully. A beat passed. Then, the front door opened without a knock. Tina walked in, phone in hand, purse slung over one shoulder. Oh, she said, eyebrows high. Didn't know it was vulture hour. Janelle stiffened like she'd been slapped. Eric glanced at Carolyn. You gave her a key? Of course, Carolyn said simply. Tina sauntered in, set her phone down, and gave Janelle a look that could cut drywall. Didn't realize this was a strategy meeting. Are we drafting a new obituary, or just circling the remains? Eric stood abruptly. We're trying to help. Tina smiled without warmth. Sure, just making sure nobody's helping themselves. Carolyn didn't move. She just took a slow sip of her coffee. Janelle stood too, voice a touch sharper. You know, it's really toxic to assume the worst in people. Tina tilted her head. Toxic's a strong word, but it tracks. The silence dragged like metal on concrete. Eric exhaled sharply. We'll be in touch, Carolyn nodded. I'm sure you will. They left without another word, the front door clicking shut a little too hard behind them. Tina waited a full 5 seconds before speaking. They reek of desperation. They reek of certainty, Carolyn said. Tina looked over. What's the difference? Carolyn's gaze didn't shift from the door. Only one of them gets punished. The fellowship hall smelled like old hymnals, lemon polish, and secrets no one thought God was listening to. Folding chairs were arranged in a semicircle under fluorescent lights that hummed faintly above. A whiteboard listed last week's bake sale numbers in faded blue marker. But all eyes were on the woman in the burgundy coat. Carolyn stood beside Reverend Tom Ellison, who looked as stunned as he did honored. "You're sure?" he asked softly. Carolyn gave a small nod. "I'm not dying, but they've already tried to bury me once. I'm choosing where my story ends." The church board members, mostly women in their 50s and 60s with half-moons of reading glasses perched on their noses, shifted in their seats. No one objected. She reached into her bag and handed Tom the manila folder. Inside, notarized transfer documents, the deed to her home, and a binding agreement already reviewed by David Worthington himself. "The property will be converted into transitional housing," Carolyn said clearly, her voice echoing off linoleum and faith. "After I pass. Until then, it's mine. I included a no eviction clause." Tom flipped through the pages, visibly moved. "Carolyn, this is necessary," she finished. "There are too many women in this town who run out of options. I won't be one of them, and neither will they." A silence followed. Then the board voted, unanimous. The chairwoman scribbled her signature on the bottom line, glasses slipping as she bent forward. "May God bless you for this." Carolyn only smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Outside, the afternoon light was soft and slanted, catching dust in the air like falling gold. Tina stood at the base of Carolyn's porch steps, camera in hand, snapping wide shots of the house. "We'll use these for the press release," she said, "before the vultures try to spin the story their way." "Let them spin," Carolyn replied. "I already nailed the floorboard shut." Tina crouched to photograph the weathered welcome mat, then stood and gestured toward the porch swing. "Sit. Natural light's perfect." Carolyn obeyed, the old swing creaking under her. Behind her, the American flag flapped lazily against the siding. She sat straight, proud, not performative. "You want me smiling in this?" she asked. Tina peered through the lens. "No, just look like the woman who took back her story." Click. Across town, David sat at his desk in the county records office, sleeves rolled to the elbows, tie loosened, face set with quiet resolve. The clerk at the counter gave him a small nod as she stamped the file. "Deed filed. Effective immediately," she said. David slid the folder back into his briefcase. "Make sure it's not searchable under her name. Use the foundation title." The clerk raised an eyebrow. "You expecting blowback?" David zipped the case closed. "I'm expecting vultures." By dusk, Carolyn was back home, porch light glowing amber behind her. Tina had gone for the night, but her scent, jasmine and peppermint tea, still clung to the kitchen. Carolyn stood in the doorway with a mug in her hand, watching the quiet outside like a general surveying the edge of a battlefield. Then headlights appeared. A black Mercedes rolled slowly down the street, too slow for someone passing through, too precise for someone lost. Carolyn didn't move. The car pulled up across the street and idled. From behind the tinted glass, Janelle stepped out, heels clacking gently against the curb. She wore sunglasses, though the sun had already ducked behind the hills. In her hand, a leather-bound notebook and a silver tape measure. She didn't approach. Instead, she stared at the house for a full minute, then walked to the edge of the sidewalk. She measured the width of the front windows, then the distance from porch to fence. Carolyn sipped her tea and turned off the porch light. Janelle froze, just for a second, then turned and walked back to the car. She never looked up. But Carolyn saw enough. The headline hit like a thunderclap across the front page of the Asheville Tribune. "Widow donates historic home for women's housing. They planned my ending. I rewrote it." Below it, the photo. Carolyn seated on her porch swing, scarf gone, spine straight, eyes steady. Behind her, the flag. In her lap, an oversized check made out to the Ellison Foundation for Transitional Housing. $940,000. Signed, sealed, filed. Eric held the newspaper in one hand, crumpling the edge with his grip. She's lost her damn mind, Janelle grabbed the photo, nails digging into the paper. No, she's making a statement. She gave away the house. She gave away our house, Janelle snapped. That equity was part of the long-term plan. Eric threw the paper onto the granite counter. She's doing this to screw us. Publicly, Janelle was already grabbing her keys. Let's see if she's got the guts to say it to our faces. The knock this time wasn't polite. It was 3 firm pounds, legal, loud, and impatient. Carolyn didn't jump. She set down her crossword, adjusted her cardigan, and walked calmly to the door. She opened it with the same stillness she used to end arguments at board meetings. Eric's face was red. Janelle's eyes burned like glass under a blowtorch. "Are you insane?" Eric barked, stepping inside without being invited. Carolyn stepped back just enough to make it look intentional. Janelle followed, slamming the door behind her. "You're humiliating us." Carolyn moved toward the kitchen, her tone as level as her pace. "Interesting choice of pronoun," Eric trailed behind, still fuming. "You went public. You made this political." "I made it personal," Carolyn said. Which it always was. She set down 3 mugs, poured steaming water from a pot on the stove, and dropped in the same ginger tea bags Tina had left behind. Eric didn't touch his. Janelle slapped her purse down on the table. "You think this is noble? You think giving away what you owe your family makes you some kind of martyr?" Carolyn stirred her tea. "Did you know I'm still alive?" That stopped them. Just for a moment. Eric opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Carolyn looked at him. "Because when I woke up in that hospital bed, your voice was the first thing I heard." Janelle folded her arms tightly. "That was a misunderstanding." "No, it was a moment of clarity." Carolyn leaned against the counter, the steam from her mug curling into the air between them. "You owe us that house," Janelle hissed. "We took care of you. We showed up. We had plans. Financially, this impacts us." Tina's voice cut softly from the hallway. "Well, now it impacts 100 other women, too." They all turned. Tina stood half-shadowed, phone in hand, recording light blinking red. "Delete that," Janelle snapped. Tina raised an eyebrow. "Nope. You're violating our—" "Not your home, not your kitchen, not your rules," Carolyn interrupted. She walked slowly to the front door and opened it wide, letting in a slice of crisp October air. "You know what you can inherit?" Carolyn said, voice low and even. "Your own kindness." Neither of them moved. Carolyn tilted her head. "Or whatever's left of it." Eric muttered something under his breath and shoved past her. Janelle lingered for 1 second longer, enough to let the silence sting. Then she followed, heels rapping against the wood like a warning shot. The door clicked shut behind them. Tina exhaled. "You want me to send this to David?" "Not yet," Carolyn said, locking the door slowly. "Let them hang themselves with the rope they brought." She turned and stared at the tea left untouched on the counter. Steam still rose from Janelle's cup, but it was cooling fast. David's email arrived at dawn. No greeting, no sign-off, just a single screenshot and 1 line. "We're prepared." Carolyn read it twice, her coffee cooling in her hand. The screenshot showed Eric's text, clipped, smug, a digital smirk. Prepared for what? A lawsuit? A smear campaign? She almost laughed. They still thought this was chess. It wasn't. It was checkmate they hadn't recognized yet. She clicked reply. Received. Thank you. All set on my end. See. Then she closed the laptop and turned to the camera sitting on her kitchen table. "Ready?" Tina asked, adjusting the tripod. She had come over before sunrise, her hair still wet from the shower, eyes alive with the kind of focus only adrenaline can buy. Carolyn smoothed her scarf, not the burgundy one, but a dark navy silk, formal. "As I'll ever be," Tina hit record. Rolling. Carolyn looked directly into the lens. My name is Carolyn Elridge, she began, voice steady. This is my living video, Will. The words filled the room like a verdict. Everything you're about to see has been recorded, notarized, and filed with my attorney, David Worthington, she continued. I am of sound mind. No one is forcing me to do this. No one is coercing me. She paused, letting the silence tighten. I have disinherited Eric and Janelle Elridge, she said clearly. This decision is permanent and intentional. It is based on their actions and my own moral obligation to redirect my estate to causes that reflect my values. Education, housing, and medical support for women in crisis. Tina watched from behind the camera, lips pressed together. Carolyn's tone wasn't bitter. It was something colder, factual, the way a doctor might explain a terminal diagnosis. If they contest this will, Carolyn added, they forfeit all rights to contact me, now and in the future. That clause is binding. It's already signed. She folded her hands in her lap and looked straight down the barrel of the lens. This is not revenge, she said. This is my legacy. Tina gave a small nod from behind the tripod. That's it. Perfect. Carolyn exhaled. Send a copy to David. Keep another in the safe. Already on it. They broke for a moment, the kitchen filling with the smell of toast. Outside, a delivery truck rattled past. Life moved on. By afternoon, they were working on the public version. The same camera, but softer light. No scarf, just a plain sweater. Carolyn's tone this time was gentle, the message broad but unshakably firm. I believe we should all have the right to decide where our life's work goes, she said. Mine will go where it can do the most good. No names, no accusations, just principle. Tina uploaded the clip to the local station's tip line under the heading Feature Suggestion, Seniors Reshaping Legacy. Within hours, a producer called back. By that evening, Carolyn's face was on Channel 7's Elder Voices segment. They cut in the porch, swing photo, the check handoff, and a soft focus shot of her house's front porch, captioned, From Family Home to Future Haven. The comments rolled in like a tide. You're a hero. This is what community looks like. Standing ovation from our church group. Wish my mom had your courage. Carolyn scrolled through them without smiling. Praise was nice, but it wasn't the point. The point was that Eric and Janelle couldn't rewrite her story anymore. Not in a courtroom, not in a living room, not in the court of public opinion. Her phone buzzed again. Another message from David. He's called twice. Wants to discuss options. She typed back. Tell him everything's already filed. Then she set the phone face down on the table. Tina poured them both tea, setting the mug near Carolyn's elbow. Feels like a storm's coming, she said softly. Carolyn stared at the window. The October sky was steel gray, clouds rolling low, heavy with something not yet released. They still don't understand, she murmured. Understand what? Carolyn's eyes stayed on the sky. That this isn't a threat. She picked up her tea, her reflection warping in the dark surface. It's a promise. The first clip resurfaced on a Tuesday. It was a 7-second audio bite posted anonymously on a local subreddit. Muffled hospital hallway voices, clear enough to make out every syllable. She'll be dead by morning. Leave that woman here to die. We've done enough. The subreddit's title was Insa Silent Inheritance. The post had no caption, just the raw recording and a single tag. Setstat Eric and Janelle. By noon, it hit Facebook. By dusk, it was on TikTok, layered over footage of Carolyn's Channel 7 interview. The contrast struck like a lightning bolt, the coldness of their words slicing across the warmth of Carolyn's quiet dignity. Commenters didn't hold back. This woman's stronger than anyone in that hospital. Eric and Janelle? Monsters in designer shoes. You don't forget a voice like that, and you sure as hell don't forgive it. Within 48 hours, Eric's employer, an insurance firm with a glossy diversity pledge, placed him on leave. By week's end, he was quietly demoted. Janelle fared worse. Her name was trending on Twitter under a brand of betrayal. After a marketing client backed out mid-contract, citing integrity misalignment. By Friday, she was suspended pending review. Neither released a statement. Carolyn did not gloat. She didn't post, didn't comment, didn't whisper a word to the papers. She let the echo chamber run its own trial. Truth had a rhythm of its own now. She just let it hum. At night, she sat on the porch and listened to the wind, letting it carry the noise away. The church's invitation came the following Sunday. A hand-delivered letter folded neatly inside an envelope that still smelled faintly of cedar pews and communion wine. Would you speak on legacy and forgiveness at our Sunday gathering? We believe the community needs your voice now more than ever. Carolyn didn't respond immediately. She read the letter, then read it again. Then she stared at it for a long time, her fingers tapping lightly against the kitchen table, the rhythm echoing something deeper. Not anger, not pride, just knowing. That Sunday, the fellowship hall was packed. Every folding chair was filled. The choir risers had been repurposed for overflow seating. Even the teenagers, usually glued to the back row, looked up from their phones. Carolyn took the stage with no introduction. She wore no scarf, no jewelry, just a charcoal blouse and black slacks, like she'd come not to inspire, but to instruct. She stood still for a moment, letting silence settle like dust. Then she began. People talk a lot about forgiveness, she said, as if it's currency, a transaction, something we trade to feel noble or good. She looked across the sea of faces. Some nodded, some didn't blink. Forgiveness is a door, she continued. It leads somewhere real, but I don't have to hold it open. Not for everyone. The room didn't breathe. Carolyn's voice didn't rise. It stayed low even, controlled. Sometimes the most sacred thing you can do is close the door and leave it closed. From the back row, Tina's face flickered with something between awe and pride. Forgiveness, Carolyn said, should never be mistaken for forgetting. Or worse, permission. She stepped away from the mic. Applause didn't erupt, it unfolded. Like people were afraid to break what had just happened. Carolyn walked back to her seat, the same unshakable posture she'd carried through the fire. Tina leaned over and whispered, "You're the quiet storm they deserve." Carolyn didn't smile, but her eyes softened. Let them chase the lightning. The courthouse smelled like dust, old wood, and fluorescent lights that had seen more lies than justice. Room 312 was half full. Small town, big interest. Reporters hadn't shown up yet, but a few curious neighbors had, the kind who always knew something was coming, but never guessed this. Carolyn sat in the second row behind the defense table, hands folded neatly in her lap. She wore no makeup, just a navy blue blouse and gray slacks, sober, deliberate, untouched by drama. To her left sat David, calm as ever, one leg crossed over the other, briefcase balanced on his knee. Across the aisle, Eric sat stiffly at the plaintiff's table, suit too tight around the neck, jaw tight with anticipation. Janelle was nowhere to be seen. The judge entered without ceremony, robe flowing, eyes already tired from years of watching people dig their own graves. Case number 24 CV 709. Elridge vs. Elridge. Contestation of will, the clerk called. Eric stood clearing his throat as he stepped forward. Your Honor, we believe Miss Carolyn Elridge's current will was made under impaired judgment due to recent medical trauma. It is our position that she lacks the cognitive clarity to make binding legal decisions. David stood slowly. We have medical evidence refuting that claim, Your Honor, submitted and time-stamped 3 weeks ago. The judge raised an eyebrow. That would be the independent cognitive assessment from Dr. Mallory Green? Yes, David said, handing over a neatly clipped packet. Licensed neuropsychologist. 35 years of practice. Her full evaluation concludes Ms. Elridge is of excellent cognitive health. Sound judgment. No impairment. No history of neurological decline. In fact, the report states, and I quote, lucid, precise, and categorically independent in thought and speech. The judge skimmed the first page, then looked up, Mr. Elridge, did you bring any medical counter-evidence? Eric shifted in place. No, Your Honor, but we had concerns. The judge held up a hand. Concern is not evidence. Silence. David continued, voice smooth and crisp. Furthermore, Your Honor, we have a notarized living video will from Ms. Elridge, filed in accordance with state statutes. It clearly outlines her reasoning for disinheritance, with no coercion or confusion. Additionally, with the court's permission, we'd like to submit audiovisual evidence relevant to the family's pattern of conduct. The judge sighed. Let's see it. David pulled out a flash drive and inserted it into the courtroom monitor's port. The screen lit up with a paused image. A hospital hallway, slightly grainy from the security camera footage. David pressed play. She'll be dead by morning. Leave that woman here to die. We've done enough. The audio filled the room like a confession dropped in water. The judge leaned back in his chair, expression unreadable until it wasn't. His lips thinned, his jaw set. His pen stopped moving. Eric's face turned the color of damp cement. David let the silence breathe before speaking. The voice you heard first belongs to the plaintiff. The judge tapped the folder in front of him. Court finds no evidence of mental incapacity. Contestation is dismissed. A soft murmur rose from the seats behind Carolyn. David didn't look back. Your Honor, one final matter. Given the plaintiff's repeated attempts to undermine a legally executed will, public harassment, and submission of a baseless claim, we're filing a request for a protective order against both Mr. and Ms. Elridge. Scope includes Carolyn Elridge's residence, personal contacts, and all future estate proceedings. Eric's mouth opened. David didn't flinch. We're also notifying the state bar of the baseless nature of this contest under probate fraud standards. If Your Honor wishes to escalate that independently, I do, the judge cut in, tone clipped. Restraining order granted pending full review. Let the record show this contest was not only meritless, it was manipulative. Eric looked as though he'd been gutted and left to twitch. Carolyn finally stood, quietly, no smile, no smirk, just presence. As she turned to leave, the room hushed around her. The kind of hush reserved for people who just won something bigger than a case. David gathered his files. Didn't even have to raise our voices. Carolyn gave a soft nod. That's the luxury of truth. It speaks for itself. By the time Judge Holloway entered the room for the final ruling, even the bailiff looked bored. But Carolyn knew better. Justice never arrived in a roar. It came quietly, dressed in a black robe, carrying paperwork thicker than shame. Eric sat 2 rows back, suit wrinkled, tie gone. His hands clasped in front of him like a schoolboy waiting for detention. Janelle sat beside him this time, tight ponytail, sunglasses still on, even indoors. The judge didn't waste time. This court finds the previous claim not only unsubstantiated but also frivolous, he said. Flipping through the final pages of his ruling, Ms. Carolyn Elridge acted within full legal and mental capacity. The estate remains intact as filed. Carolyn sat motionless, chin slightly raised. The judge turned to Eric. Mr. Elridge, court costs and attorney fees will be covered by the plaintiff. Eric flinched. His jaw ticked. Then the judge turned to Janelle. Ms. Elridge, you will submit a court-mandated written apology to Ms. Carolyn Elridge to be filed within 10 business days. It will be reviewed and verified before any future legal motion is considered. Janelle's mouth opened. David didn't even turn her way. Let me guess, he whispered to Carolyn. Now she knows how to spell humility. Carolyn didn't answer. Her eyes stayed forward, steady. The gavel fell. Not loud, but final. Outside, the fall air cut clean against Carolyn's skin. No reporters swarmed. Just a single local journalist waiting by the courthouse steps, recorder already in hand. Mr. Elridge, she said gently, you declined comment last time. Do you want to say anything now? Carolyn paused, then offered a thin smile. Yes, the reporter leaned in. You're never too old to be disrespected, Carolyn said. But you're also never too old to do something about it. The reporter's face lit up like she'd just won a journalism prize. The check arrived 3 days later, court-mandated reimbursement for legal fees and emotional damages. It was thicker than it should have been. Eric must have pushed for a quick settlement to avoid further escalation. Carolyn signed the back and drove it straight to the Ashe County Senior Resource Fund. She handed it across the counter to the startled receptionist. Use it for heating bills, she said, and eyeglasses, the kind Medicare won't cover. The woman blinked. Would you like a receipt? No, Carolyn said. Just results. Back at home, Tina sat cross-legged on the couch, scrolling through Twitter. Your quote's trending, she said. Never too old to be disrespected. She held up her phone. Someone turned it into a graphic. Black and white. Big bold letters. Carolyn stirred her tea. Figures. Tina laughed. That's going on my ribcage. Carolyn arched an eyebrow. I'm serious, Tina said. That'll be my next tattoo. Right below the magnolia branch. Carolyn sipped. Put it on your forehead. Might save time. Later that night, she sat alone in her office, the air quiet around her. No courtroom tension, no sirens in her chest. Just the scratch of her pen against paper. She reviewed everything again. The will, the trusts, the deed transfer, the clause about peace. Then she opened a new envelope and slid a single handwritten page inside. A final note. Not for the court, not for Eric, not for Janelle. Just for the executor who'd one day read her intentions out loud. At the bottom, she signed her name. Steady, clean. Carolyn May Elridge. Then she slid it into the folder labeled Final Instructions, placed it back in the fireproof safe, and closed the latch. She turned off the light and walked slowly through her home. Room by room, porch to hallway, past the photographs, past the ghosts. She stopped by the front door, hand resting on the frame. The wind outside was stronger now, something shifting in it. A storm was coming, but it wasn't hers anymore. The envelope lay on the kitchen table like something that had washed ashore. White, creased, hand-addressed in a script Carolyn knew better than her own. Janelle's handwriting, sharp loops softened at the edges, as though someone had practiced humility and still hadn't mastered it. She hadn't planned to open it. She'd sworn to David she wouldn't. Yet here it was, slit neatly across the top. The letter unfolded like a plea already on its knees. Dear Mom, it began. Not Carolyn, not Ms. Elridge. Mom. She read on. We're sorry for how things went. We were scared. We made mistakes. You didn't mean it when you disinherited us, right? Eric says maybe you were just angry. Maybe you didn't understand how hard we worked for you. We're family. That house should have stayed with us. Please call. Please? There were smudges on the page where ink had bled, but no tear marks. Janelle didn't cry on paper. She negotiated. Carolyn set the letter down. The kitchen smelled faintly of lemon oil and something baking from a neighbor's window. Outside, a blue jay shrieked once and went silent. She slid the letter into a manila folder already sitting on the counter. On its tab, written in her own hand, reminders. She closed it with a soft snap. Not angry, not even sad. Just done. Tina arrived 10 minutes later carrying a stack of glossy brochures and 2 iced coffees. She plunked them onto the table and eyed the folder. Another love note. Carolyn arched an eyebrow, half apology, half begging. Tina snorted, flipping through the brochures. Sounds like my last relationship. Carolyn said nothing. Tina pushed one of the brochures across the table. So, about what we talked about, the celebration. Carolyn's fingers traced the edge of the paper. A photograph of the church hall decked in soft lights. The words, Legacy Dinner, printed in looping script. You could do it your way, Tina said. Invite who you want. Play the music you want. No speeches you didn't approve. Carolyn's gaze drifted to the window. A living wake? Tina shrugged. Call it whatever you want. Just make it yours. Carolyn let the idea settle like a stone dropped into deep water. Maybe. Not maybe, Tina said softly. Let's make your final celebration the one you choose. By afternoon, David arrived with a briefcase under one arm and a small legal pad in the other. He smelled faintly of rain and courthouse dust. Everything's signed, sealed, and filed, he said, setting the briefcase on the table. No further loopholes, not even creative ones. He poured himself a glass of water from the tap. They're boxed out, Carolyn, completely. Contestation attempts, property claims, harassment, all covered. Carolyn nodded. Thank you. David studied her for a moment. You don't look relieved. I am, she said. Just not in the way people expect. He leaned against the counter. How's that? She placed her hands flat on the table. I'm at peace, but I'm not at mercy. The words landed like a gavel. David nodded once. That's a good place to be. He gathered his papers, snapped the briefcase closed, and headed for the door. Call me if anything changes. Carolyn waited until the sound of his car faded down the street. Then she opened the folder labeled Reminders again, slipped the letter deeper inside, and shut it with a decisive tap. That night, she sat on the porch alone, the sky a pale wash of late autumn. Somewhere down the road, an engine idled, not unusual in a small town. But this one didn't move on. She set her tea down, rose from the swing, and peered through the slats of the porch railing. Two silhouettes in a parked car. Not Eric's Mercedes, not Janelle's SUV, unknown. They weren't moving, just sitting, watching. Carolyn's hand tightened on the porch rail. For the first time in weeks, she felt the hair at the back of her neck lift. The auditorium wasn't large, just the back wing of the town's civic center, walls paneled in honey-colored wood, ceiling fans humming gently above rows of folding chairs. But every seat was filled. Some people stood in the back. A few sat on the floor near the stage, legs crossed, notebooks open. Carolyn stood behind the podium in a dark green blazer. No scarf, no teleprompter. Just a glass of water and a single handwritten note card in her palm. Behind her, a banner read, The Value of Voice, Women Reclaiming Legacy. She looked out at the sea of faces. Then she spoke. Inheritance is not a right, she said, her voice calm, firm, measured. Respect is. The words landed like a stone tossed into still water, ripple after ripple moving through the crowd. She didn't rush. We teach people to plan for death, she continued, but not for betrayal. We draft wills, not boundaries. We leave behind things, but rarely ourselves. A few heads nodded, then a few more. I didn't lose everything, she said. I chose to reclaim what mattered, not the house, not the money, my name, my dignity. That's what they tried to write out of the story. She paused, letting the silence stretch. And that's what I wrote back in. A woman in the third row stood, applauding, then another and another. The room rose with them. Carolyn stood still in it, not soaking it in, owning it, not triumph, not revenge, just truth. Backstage, Tina wrapped her in a hug so tight Carolyn had to pat her shoulder twice to breathe again. Tina stepped back, eyes glassy. That's your legacy now. You know that, right? I'm starting to, Carolyn said softly. Tina nodded toward the bouquet on the green room table. Publisher left those. Said you'll need flowers for your first book tour. Carolyn blinked. Book tour? Tina handed her the envelope. Inside, a contract, signed and dated. Title, rewritten by survival author. Carolyn May Elridge. Publisher, Pine Oak Press. Due date for manuscript, June 1st. Carolyn's breath caught, not from disbelief, but recognition. She'd always written her truths in quiet places. Now someone had asked her to say them out loud. The accompanying photo mock-up was clipped to the back. Her image, full page, standing in front of the church garden, soft fall leaves behind her, wind lifting the edge of her coat. Chin high, eyes forward, not mourning, moving. That night back home, she placed the contract in her office drawer. Then she turned off the light and moved to the porch swing, cup of chamomile in hand. The same car from the night before was gone. In its place, stillness. Only the wind and the sound of rustling leaves. Nothing watching, nothing circling. For the first time in months, she let her shoulders fall all the way back. A kind of softness she hadn't earned. She'd built it. The laptop on her side table pinged. An email from Eric Elridge. Subject: please reconsider. I know I've said the wrong things, done the wrong things, but I didn't expect to lose you too. I thought there was still time. Please? Carolyn didn't click reply. She clicked archive. Then she closed the screen and turned back to the dark sky, one hand resting on the arm of the swing, the other still holding her tea. Some storms don't end with thunder. They end when you walk through them and don't look back. The siding had been repainted, pale robin's egg blue with white trim. The porch railing gleamed with fresh lacquer. The garden beds, once tired and overrun with ivy, now bloomed with yellow mums and late autumn asters. Carolyn stood at the edge of the sidewalk, coat buttoned, fingers tucked into her pockets, watching her house breathe a new kind of life. Above the front steps, sunlight glinted off a bronze plaque, the Bear Home for Those Left Behind, dedicated by Carolyn May Elridge. November 18th. She didn't go in right away. The house no longer belonged to her. That was the point. But she walked the perimeter, slow and quiet, like visiting an old friend who'd learned to smile again. Curtains fluttered in the upstairs windows. New residents, new stories. A wind chime clinked gently on the porch beam. A nurse stepped outside and spotted her. "You must be Carolyn," she said, voice soft with recognition. "I was," Carolyn replied, not correcting her. "You're welcome anytime." Carolyn gave a small nod, then stepped through the door she'd once owned. Inside, the entryway had been opened up. Where a family photo once hung, there was now a corkboard lined with affirmations written in careful handwriting. "You're still here. That matters. We don't whisper here. We speak. Hot tea in the kitchen. Help yourself." The place smelled of cinnamon and old books. Warmth layered over memory. A home inside a home. Carolyn made her way to the common room, where 3 women sat in armchairs, knitting, reading, one just watching the wind move through the windows. She didn't introduce herself, just set a canvas tote down on the coffee table. Inside, 3 hand-stitched blankets, 2 boxes of chamomile, and a stack of crossword books. A woman in her 60s, wrapped in a thick shawl, looked up slowly. You're the one who used to live here, aren't you?" "I am," Carolyn said gently. "They told me to die too," the woman whispered, more to herself than anyone else. "Said it was easier. Cheaper." Carolyn sat beside her and poured a cup of tea from the ceramic pot someone had left warming on the tray. "Then we lived," Carolyn said. "That was the loudest thing we could do." The woman blinked slowly. Her eyes shone but didn't fall. Carolyn placed the warm mug in her hands and gave her the thickest blanket. No more words passed. None needed. She didn't stay long. The house belonged to them now, the women who walked its halls without apology, without asking permission to exist. She stepped back into the late afternoon air, wind threading through the bare trees along the drive. As she crossed the street, Carolyn looked back once. No car idling, no ghosts at the windows, just light, and laughter faintly echoing from somewhere upstairs. Back at home, Carolyn slipped off her coat and moved to the office. She didn't turn on the overhead light. Just the desk lamp, warm, amber, familiar. She opened her bottom drawer, pulled out the thick cloth-bound journal Tina had gifted her weeks ago. On the first page, she'd written only a title. For when they ask what I did now, she opened to a fresh page, pen in hand. She didn't start with a name. She didn't start with a date. She wrote, "They didn't expect me to rise. They expected obedience, grief, weakness, anything but survival. So I gave them none of it. What I gave instead was a legacy they could never spend, silence, or sell. She underlined the final sentence. Then she paused. There was more to say, not for them, for whoever came next. She kept writing. The pen moved without hesitation. A knock came at the door, soft, deliberate. She capped the pen, closed the journal, and turned toward it, unafraid. The knock came again, softer this time, hesitant, like a question. Carolyn opened the door. The porch light caught the edges of a face she hadn't seen in 10 years. "Hi," the young woman said. Voice small, eyes rimmed red. "It's me, Layla." Carolyn didn't speak at first. She simply studied the girl who wasn't a girl anymore. Her late sister's daughter, taller now, with streaks of gray in her black curls. A trembling in her hands she tried to hide by gripping her coat collar. "I wasn't sure you'd open," Layla said. "I almost didn't come." Carolyn stepped aside. "Come in." Inside, the house felt warmer than usual, maybe because it was full of ghosts being named. Layla stood by the entryway, scanning the photos Carolyn had left on the wall, the ones that hadn't been boxed away. "I know I shouldn't just show up," Layla said quietly. "But after everything with Eric and Janelle, I kept thinking about you, about what I didn't do." Carolyn motioned toward the kitchen table. "Sit." Layla sat, hands folded so tightly her knuckles were white. "I should have written sooner," she said. "I should have called. I was just young, scared. You were this strong thing I couldn't understand. And when they started talking about your will in the house, I didn't know what to believe, so I stayed away. For years." Carolyn poured 2 mugs of tea, set one in front of her. "Why now?" Layla's eyes welled but didn't spill. "Because you survived. Because you didn't disappear. And because I can't keep pretending I wasn't wrong." Carolyn sat across from her, fingers wrapped around her own mug. Her voice was low. "Did you mean to hurt me?" Layla's face crumpled at the question. "No. God, no. I was too young. I didn't understand." For a moment, the house held only the sound of the kettle cooling. Then Carolyn reached across the table, placed a steady hand over Layla's trembling ones, and squeezed. "Then we begin again," she said. Layla made a sound between a sob and a laugh. "You'd do that? After everything?" Carolyn rose, came around the table, and pulled her into a hug. It was not the tentative kind. It was the kind you give to someone who's been walking in circles and finally found the door. From the porch, a soft creak of wood. Tina stood there, leaning against the frame, watching without intruding. Her eyes met Carolyn's over Layla's shoulder. She gave the smallest nod, a signal of quiet approval. Carolyn nodded back. Later, after Layla had left for the night, eyes less red now, promises made to visit again, Carolyn sat at her desk. The journal lay open, but tonight she didn't write in it. Tonight she reached for her trust papers. She scanned the clauses, her finger pausing at the beneficiaries list. The pen hovered over the blank margin where David had left space for amendments. Slowly, in her neat lawyer-trained hand, she wrote, "Conditional beneficiary, Laylee Brooks. Eligibility contingent upon direct community service at the Bear Home, non-contestation of trust clauses, and adherence to stipulations outlined in Appendix C." She signed the amendment and slid it into a separate envelope marked "To File" with David. It wasn't forgiveness without boundaries. It was a bridge, strong, but built on her terms. She set the pen down, then glanced toward the window. The porch light cast a halo on the empty swing where Tina had sat earlier. The night beyond was calm, but the trees shifted with an unseen wind. Carolyn closed the trust folder and reached for her phone to text David. Before she could type, the screen lit up on its own. A new email alert blinked at the top. Subject line: "I'm not done yet. Sender: unknown." She stared at it for a long time. Then she tapped the screen once, but didn't open it. Not yet. The morning sun melted gently across the garden beds, catching dew on the lavender and the first tulip tips of spring. The church courtyard had never looked like this before. Open, breathing, full of color. Not just life returning, but life choosing to stay. Carolyn walked the path between flower beds slowly, her coat unbuttoned, scarf tucked loosely at her throat. On either side of her, Layla and Tina moved in step, Layla carrying a small trowel in one gloved hand, Tina balancing 2 paper cups of tea with the other. They walked without words for a while, not out of awkwardness, out of reverence. At the edge of the garden, a woman knelt at the soil, planting marigolds in careful rows. Her clothes were simple, sleeves pushed to the elbow. Her hands were steady, worn by weather and time. Carolyn recognized her, once a resident at the Bear home, someone who had arrived with 1 bag, no shoes, and a diagnosis others thought was a sentence. The woman looked up and smiled, eyes crinkling. "This is yours," she said softly. "You gave me spring again." Carolyn felt her throat catch, not from grief, from weight, the good kind. She reached out, fingers brushing over the bronze garden plaque affixed to the stone wall behind them. It read, "Planted in honor of survival, because peace isn't inherited. It's built." She pressed her hand flat against the cool metal. "I didn't give you spring," Carolyn said. "You took it back." The woman smiled wider. "Only because you left the gate unlocked." Later that afternoon, the journal was delivered to the town's public library. Carolyn carried it herself. Wore gloves, not for fashion, but for ceremony. Inside, hundreds of pages, her handwriting sharp, then fluid. Pain, then power. Margins annotated in pencil. Quotes from poems she no longer remembered by name. The library director took the journal with both hands. "We'll archive it in the special collections room. Climate-controlled, cataloged under local history and women's legacy." Carolyn nodded. "Thank you." She turned to leave, but paused in the doorway. "If anyone asks why it ends when it does," she said, "tell them that's the moment I didn't need to explain anymore." That night, Carolyn sat on the porch with a blanket wrapped around her knees. Tina sat cross-legged beside her, guitar in hand, idly plucking strings she never intended to finish. Layla leaned against the railing, sipping her tea, watching stars emerge from behind soft spring clouds. "I thought I'd die alone," Carolyn said quietly, eyes on the horizon. Tina looked up. "You didn't." "I thought I'd be erased." "You weren't," Layla said. "You rewrote yourself." Carolyn smiled. Well, not bad for a woman they left behind. In the library archive, the final page of Carolyn's journal was opened a week later by a visiting high school student researching local history. The last entry was written in ink slightly darker than the rest. Not elegant, intentional. "I lived long enough to know who loved me, and longer still to love myself again." Beneath it, one final sentence, boxed in, bold, centered, unflinching. "My son and daughter-in-law abandoned me at the hospital and said, 'Leave that woman here to die.' So when I recovered, I got up and donated everything they thought they'd inherit." The student stared at the words for a long time, then copied them into her notebook. She didn't look up until her teacher called her name twice.